Welcome to our podcast today. Champions are built. This is Coach EJ, the brand.
This is Coach Aaron, the source. Good morning, EJ. What's on tap for us today?
Aaron, man, a hot subject is coming up, and I've seen this happen over the past probably 6 months. And now we see Major League Baseball starting to question, really the Players Association, the union, start to question about the rules of baseball. And it's relevant to this subject, arm injuries. So our topic today, Aaron, is how many pitches is too much? Arm injuries from youth baseball to Major League Baseball.
Good subject. Yeah, and actually we're right in the thick of it. It's funny because I've got my guys who, the guys who are coming in during their season now, and we're always doing kind of that arm check where I'm asking them, well, hey, when did you throw last? How many pitches did you throw? What'd you do after to recover? How's it feeling today? We kind of go through a whole checklist, and then based on how their body is doing, we then change the training protocol. Ty Wilson was just in last night, and he had a successful outing, but he threw 80 pitches. And that was over, I think, 5.5 innings. And so he was not necessarily sore in his arm, but he was sore in his lats and
good
other parts of his body.
Good.
And so we had to address that. So I think all of it goes hand in hand. Not just monitoring a pitch count, but what are you doing before and after to make sure that you're kind of somewhat bulletproofing yourself from any kind of injury? Because I think what people don't understand is, an injury can happen in one game, but there's probably been things leading up to it. It's probably more of a cumulative effect of some things that you're doing or not doing, and that just happens to be the moment that you hurt your arm.
Right.
And so I think if people look at it globally versus just, this one game, this one incident, I think they can kind of, one, prepare themselves, or not prepare themselves, but protect themselves from getting hurt. And two, making sure that they don't dig themselves into a hole and that leads to an injury. So that's kind of some of my open thoughts on it.
Cool. As we go through this subject, Aaron, the biggest thing I see right now, and it's crazy. I never thought we would be seeing 11, 12, 13-year-old kids having UCL problems.
Yeah.
Especially with the growth plate issue. And, we're not going to do surgery on a kid like that. We're going to let that growth plate close a little bit. But that player is really shut down anywhere from 4 to 6 months from really throwing. And then there's a throwing protocol to get back to playing catch and getting the arm stronger. We're not even talking about pitching. When I see a young player have some sort of UCL problem or some sort of shoulder issue, man, at least our group, I have a tendency to pull back, no more pitching for at least a year, because it doesn't make sense to have a young player that young having that type of injury. And unfortunately, we see a lot of these injuries before they get to our company, and it's tough because you don't know the history of how much that player has been throwing. So that leads me into this next subject, Aaron, is pitch smart. Like, how relative is pitch smart in our industry today when you don't have any background history of a player that maybe it's his first year playing with you and you don't know what's really going on with prior history? I have a lot of my program starts at 13. So what happened at 10, 11, 12? I see a lot of injuries at 10, 11, 12, elbows more than shoulders.
Well, maybe you should define what pitch smart is to the listeners so that they understand that concept.
Yeah, I will. And thanks for mentioning that. It's important. Pitch smart is a guideline that gives you the kind of boundaries of how many pitches a player is supposed to throw relative to rest. So if they throw anywhere from 20, and it's all by age now. So 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old players have different pitch counts and different amount of days of rest relative to how many pitches they threw that day. So if a 10, 11-year-old threw like 25 pitches, he's not pitching the next day. He's got 2 days off, But, again, it goes back to this. Coach's discretion. He has 2 days off, but how's that pitcher feeling after those 25 pitches and had 2 days off? Is the arm tired? Can he come back? And that's what you really have to be conscientious as a coach is, though he may be able to throw and they said, okay, pitch smart, it's all right to throw, it doesn't necessarily mean that player is ready to throw. And I think that's important. Coaches need to do their due diligence with pitch smart. Pitch smart gives you a guideline to follow. It's not the end all when a player is ready to throw.
Now, I have a question, because it's been a while, but does the type of pitches now, is that even counted as a factor? Because I remember just not too long ago, you were talking about, hey, certain ages shouldn't throw certain types of pitches. Right. They shouldn't throw, is that going to take into account instead of just the total number of pitches, but also the types of pitches that athletes are using? Well, or it's still old school, kind of like, oh, hey, if you're 8 years old or you're under 12 years old, you don't throw curves, or you can only throw so many curves, in a game. Has it gotten more sophisticated now? Is there any statistics or anything like that looking at that sort of thing?
I will tell you, I know 3 doctors who are professionals and team doctors of major league teams, and we talk about the stress that throwing has off a hill, the mound, okay? That's one thing, the stress of that. But the second thing is the type of pitches is really important. I don't think any kid under 12 should be throwing a curveball. I'm adamant about it. Look, I pitched in a Little League World Series, threw a fastball slider. I threw 75 miles per hour at that age 12. I threw hard. I threw 144 pitches in 5 innings, five innings, and my arm wasn't the same. I still had a blessed arm, but it wasn't the same after that. It wasn't the natural motion and stuff. And I never had any problems after that, elbow problems or shoulder problems. But I didn't have that natural gift that Sean Dunston had prior to that. Sean Dunston, as you know, is a Major League shortstop who arguably had the best infield arm ever in Major League Baseball playing shortstop. So, going back to the pitches, though, which we were discussing, I don't think any 12-year-old kid and under should be throwing a curveball. I think locating the fastball inside, outside, throwing a changeup, changing speed of the ball is deceptive enough to the hitter. The hitter's having trouble with the speed, not the curving of the ball. Okay, that's what throws hitters off. And I think it's really important. If I had a 12-year-old kid, 10, 11, no curveballs. I mean, it's just too young. And then even at 13 and 14, you need to limit the amount of pitches. You definitely need to throw off-speed pitches at that age. No curve at 13, 14. Hey, 3 curves, that's enough. 4 curves, that's enough. Let's not start twisting the arm. Because kids, it's not that the curveball hurts you, Aaron. It's the fact that kids can't repeat the grip and the release point of the pitch that is, that hurts their arm. And I think that's the biggest difference. I think old school thinking needs to come back in play about, these curveballs, twisting of the elbow. Players are getting hurt doing that more than anything as they mess around and say, I'm going to try this new pitch. I'm going to throw a slider. I'm 12. What are you doing? Hey, what are you doing throwing a slider? Right. I mean, come on, really? You can't command your fastball.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think what's happened too is because there's a lot more training and specialization, there's not a big differentiation between what adults do and what kids do. Right. And, adults kind of set the template, and then, trainers and coaches kind of pull from that. And they don't always understand it or take into account the differences in physiology and physique, and you know, the adjustments that need to be made in terms of volume, you know, intensity,
Right.
and those sorts of things. And so I also have a feeling that a lot of kids, their injuries start either at practice or at some kind of training facility
Yeah.
where they're doing, you know, way too much. And yeah, you get into the game, now you got to go 100 miles an hour, and boom, you've already, there's only so many throws in an arm.
Right.
And if you've used up some of those during the week, doing different things, different intensities, and you haven't taken the proper recovery, because it's very easy, I think, with adolescents, because of the way their physiology is and how they don't manifest the red flags aren't manifested the way they are with adults in
Right.
terms of, you know, the muscle soreness or the stiffness. Those are our warning signs that for adults that say, hey, you've kind of overdone it, or you're approaching that point. Whereas with youngsters, we all seen it, you know, they can go and go and go. You know, they might go for an hour and be a little tired, and then next thing you know, they're jumping off the walls, you know, 15 minutes later.
I know.
Because their bodies are just built differently. And so it can be hard to get a handle or read on some problems that might be creeping up. And so I think things like pitch count are a safe way to kind of keep you within some boundaries, so that maybe you don't. And then you take into account the kids at those ages can't always articulate what's going on with their bodies. So there may be an athlete that has something that's bothering them, but doesn't know how to articulate it, and just says, okay, well, I'll just kind of muscle through this. So I think on a few different levels, when you're dealing with those athletes that are, you know, much younger, like I said, 14 and below, that you've got to kind of be proactive in the communication and the monitoring and setting those guidelines to prevent them from going down that slippery slope to an injury.
There definitely, I believe, in this day and age, for all players, regardless if they're pitchers or not, Aaron, there needs to be some sort of arm care program in place. Yeah. Whether it's you know, you've got, you know, I'd love to get Alan Jaeger on again and talk about these injuries and what he's seen too.
Right.
If the audience doesn't know who Alan Jaeger is, he's the godfather of long toss and his Jaeger Man program that he's instituted throughout the country. But Aaron, I think the subject I want to get to, and I think this is, and it made me think of this, is about this in-season arm care or preseason arm care, is your program, Top Guns, that you know, you have players, athletes that come in and do this program. And then also I've noticed some athletes that we share, you've instituted a in-care program, not only with the rest of their body, but I've noticed those players that are in that program with you are having less injuries and less arm, shoulder, joint issues with their elbows, and they're throwing the ball better, and they don't have the soreness, and they look really good. And I think about those 4 guys that are working with you, and relative to maybe the other players that aren't doing anything, it's a major difference. So if you could talk a little bit about the care of like the Top Guns or athletes that you have, that you've instituted some shoulder, elbow, body, other parts of the body that affect throwing. I love the audience to hear about it, because I think it's super important for a young baseball player and a professional player.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I look at, just in a general sense, I look at throwing as an athletic activity. So right. It's a total body activity. It just happens, the force just happens to transfer itself through the arm. But I try and incorporate that athletes use their total body, use their legs, use ground force transfer, all of those things to throw harder, to be more accurate, to be more balanced, to be more efficient. And yes, we do things because you want, that torque that's coming through the arm. You want the arm to be able to handle it. So we do things to strengthen the shoulder, strengthen the elbow, strengthen the wrist. Well, I even work on strengthening the grip. I think that's something that is not really looked at, but you're going to fatigue at every point. And if you don't, even though it's something that you're not necessarily, your hand's not going to be cramping and it's not, you're not going to be able to grip the ball, but there's degrees of fatigue that happen in the body and you make adjustments. And if you start to have some kind of grip or hand fatigue, what do you think you're going to do? You're going to try and accommodate that. And so now that might affect how you finish with the ball, which now might affect the forces going through the wrist and the elbow or the shoulder. Do you see what I'm saying? So
absolutely.
I'm basically looking at from head to toe.
Right.
And how the force transfers through the body and at what points, can there be a breakdown? Again, just because the point that breaks is the shoulder or is the elbow doesn't necessarily mean that area was completely weak. The cause might be something else that you're doing that puts unnecessary force or stress on those areas. So a lot of what I'm doing, and again, the mechanics of kind of getting an athlete there, they can be done 100 different ways. Different coaches, different trainers will choose different modalities. So that I'm not that concerned about, but to me, it's creating the awareness and creating a mindset of how these athletes should be looking at their body as a throwing instrument, looking at how they should be taking care of their body, both post and pre, and how they should be in tune and monitoring their body. And that's, I think, the biggest thing that athletes will get out of the program. And so a lot of them don't get hurt because they kind of have that mindset. And so they've got whatever checklist we've put together together in the class, or maybe I've given them as individuals, or what they've started to notice on their own as athletes. And they're able to go through these checklists and say, okay, based on the feedback on my checklist, this is how healthy I am. This is how ready I am to throw. This is how close I am to maybe overdoing it. So that way they can have these conversations and even before the game say, hey, coach, I can go today, but I think I'm only going to go 40. Yeah. Instead of being out there and by then the pressure is there and everything else. And you're like, well, yeah, it's hurting, but let me kind of go through it.
Oh yeah. That's red flag right there, right?
So I think just building that IQ of awareness, pitching or body awareness, and also them feeling empowered to be able to speak on it is probably what's most important to me. I'd rather see a kid take that away from my program than anything else. I know they're going to get stronger. I know they're going to get more explosive. I know, they're going to see some changes in velo and everything else. But the nugget is how you're going to continue to manage yourself as a throwing athlete.
I like that. And it kind of, you said the grip and, the fatigue of the arm because of grip. And Major League Baseball, just so you know this, in the audience, pitchers are saying the time clock, the clock between pitches, and the balls and how that changes the ball, whether it's warm or cold or the seams on it, and pressure is affecting their elbow because of, the humidifiers and all kinds. So there's been studies are going on in Major League Baseball about grip pressure, UCL, the ball, does it have too much seam, not enough seam? Is it too hot in the humidifiers? There's all kinds of things going on, all kinds of theories about that. And that leads me to this: in search of velocity is the biggest thing I see with these arm injuries, is that players are trying to throw too hard. I see young kids that I just see playing catch with heavy balls, just warming up with the heavy ball, because then it makes the ball lighter when we throw.
Yeah.
I mean, stuff like that, the education that people don't have about, you got 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 13-year-old kid throwing a heavy ball to warm up. I think there's something wrong about that, instead of, using bands and using other exercises to warm up the arm and the body, the other parts of the body that stabilize this elbow and shoulder joints. Right. It's gotten out of control with the heavy ball kind of thing now. Aaron, I'm seeing a lot of kids throw heavy balls.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm anti-heavy ball. It depends on the whole protocol you've put together. Now, I can see why people gravitate to the heavy ball, because, if you're throwing a ball that's, I don't know, whatever, 32 ounces, and now you throw one that's 8 ounces or 4 ounces, it's going to feel like your arm is flying. So I don't want to call it placebo effect, because there is some transfer. But I think when you're doing something like that, you got to be careful, because the body can still get out of sync, and you can start to introduce, if your body's used to throwing, say, 32 ounces, right? And you do a whole work, and all of a sudden you just get on the mound and want to start to throw a regular ball. Well, there's still some coordination and synchronization that has to happen. And so you get that light ball, and all of a sudden you just try and start to throw hard with it. Something might be out of sync. You might overextend something. You know what I'm saying? So I do. Kind of run the risk of injury. So if you're gonna use a weighted ball of some type, there should be a gradation in intensity and in weight down to 0, which would be a regular ball.
Right.
It's kind of like, we do the same thing in track and field. Right. You might do a couple of resisted starts, and then you do, some without resistance, but they're not all out necessarily right away. Right. And we can get away with it because maybe we only have one race in there, but a pitcher can't get away with that, because they might have to throw 12, 20 pitches in an inning, whatever it is. Right. So it doesn't quite sync up that way. There's something else that you mentioned. Oh, you're talking about warm ball, cold ball. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, warm ball, cold ball. And that's pretty interesting, because in track and field, I remember I used to bring 2 sets of cleats or spikes, one for hard tracks, one for soft tracks, because I knew each track would give my body a different response. And so I had to adjust my footwear, because my body would respond differently to each one of these tracks. Okay. And so it wasn't just about a performance thing, it was also about a health thing. If I wore a shoe that was too soft on a soft track, I'd have to work harder, which might put more strain on my hamstrings. Gotcha. If I had a hard shoe on an exceptionally hard track, I'm really gonna feel the forces and the pounding on that track, which now might affect my joints. And maybe I'm running and I'm feeling that stiffness and that hardness. And so now I start to adjust how I run. So I might plant my foot a little bit differently, or I might turn my knee a little bit differently. And now just those slight adjustments to be comfortable can result in me having a quad pull or a hamstring strain or back strain. Right. So I can understand how the interaction with the equipment that you're using can also be a factor. I didn't even think about that with the ball, but you're right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I would assume a cold ball is going to feel heavier, and you may do some adjustments to get the desired effect that you want, but they may be, counterproductive. So, and it's a pretty interesting way to look at it. Yeah, and why I mentioned the heavy balls is so the audience could be educated, because again, what I was seeing there, and I'm glad you went through the progression
of how to use like heavy balls a little bit, slightly. But I know that I see a lot of youngsters who go on social media and say, "Oh, I saw this guy doing it," and they don't even warm up. They just grab it out of their bag and start throwing it.
Yeah.
And that's what my point was really, being made, is that I will see that and go, "Hey, man, put that thing away right now. Take it easy on your arm." And I think a lot of kids are, they want to throw hard. Everybody wants to throw hard. It's been like this whole journey over the past, I'd say 10 years, to like, we need velocity. Mm-hmm. But what happened to pitchability? What happened to throwing the ball to a spot? Hitters can't hit pitches. And I'm not talking about, I'm talking about located pitches, like a high fastball, Aaron, or a low inside. Like, no one pitches inside anymore because of the bat. Like, I'm like, pound the guy's inside, because hitters don't like the ball inside. They like to get their arms extended. And that hasn't changed in the history of baseball. Who wants to work harder on the inside pitch to try to get it, But if you can command that with a fastball, I mean, instead of trying to trick them, as they say, you're in a better situation to pitch. I have a pitcher in our program who has great pitchability because he locates the ball, and he's starting to develop velocity now. And he wasn't searching for it. His body, and I think you said something important, the progression of the body. You're going to find that it's going to get better and better. You just got to put your head down, grind, and keep doing the work. But it does come if you're patient enough to wait for it. I think a lot of people aren't patient enough to wait for the progression of velocity, whatever that is for you. If you were a 78 thrower and you got 85 as best, then that would be awesome.
Right. Well, yeah, everyone's in a rush for everything. And again, it all comes down to the whole recruiting thing. I mean,
right.
Everybody wants to, and everyone wants to see speed. That's the kind of the key. Everyone wants to see velo. It's an easy number. It's easy to wrap your head around. But that's what they're chasing.
Well, Aaron, I think I don't know if you have anything else to say about it, but I think we've talked a lot about these arm injuries and things that you can do to help the youngsters. But with that said, this is Coach EJ the Brand from Champions Are Built.
And this is Coach Aaron the Source. We'll see you.